Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I have with me someone I have had the honor of performing with, and I listen to on a weekly basis on Thursdays. This is Allison Davis. Allison, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for contacting me. This is kind of weird.
Well, you're used to being on the
I'm
other end of
interviewing other
this.
people.
Right, because you are a radio personality at KUNM. You are a vocalist here in town. You are a staunch promoter of jazz here in Albuquerque and Santa Fe and all over New Mexico, which for those of us who are musicians here in town, we appreciate all the work that you do for us.
You're welcome.
Oh,
I'm a crazy lady. Yeah.
no, you're not. You're just a
Yeah.
good you're a good supporter of jazz. And again, and we'll talk about your vocal abilities and some of these other things here in a little bit. But let's start from the beginning because I've got some questions for you. Now, you excuse me, you are from Brooklyn, New York, right? Were you born
Was
and
born in
raised
Brooklyn.
there?
Yeah, no, no. We moved when I was about 4.5 and grew up on Long Island on the South Shore in Wantagh. And my mom is still in the same house. We moved there in 1956. So
Oh, okay.
still there if you may.
You're well, okay, so make sure I get this straight. So you're from Brooklyn, but then you moved out to the island?
Yeah,
Oh,
not
okay.
far away. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, no. My family's from Brooklyn, and my family is from the Long Island area. We lived in Center Reach when I was a kid,
Oh, okay, yeah.
so you know where that is. I'm
Yeah,
sure
that's a
you
little
do. In
further
Stony
out.
Brook,
Yeah.
yeah, Stony
I
Brook.
grew up right on Jones Beach, basically.
Okay, so yeah, so I know exactly where you're from.
Hmm.
So let's talk about how you got into music. Did you grow up in a musical family? Was this something, music was something that was in the house all the time?
I mean, I grew up in a family, we listened to the radio all the time, which is probably how subconsciously I ended up in radio. I have no idea. Radio was just on constantly. And as my mom got older, she switched to talk radio and other stuff. We won't go into that. But as a kid, it was always, the pop stations, not the rock stations. I discovered those a little bit later on, Cousin Brucey and all the other stuff. But yeah, it was always like Frank Sinatra, Dinah Washington, those kinds of singers all the time. So I think absorbed all of that. My dad adored Frank Sinatra, probably had all of his recordings at some point. And yeah, and then my mother also had all the original Broadway cast albums.
Oh, okay.
I grew up listening to those too. And I probably still have every word from every song of Pajama Game memory.
Ah, that's a good musical, actually.
But that's kind of how I got into music later on, was really doing musicals,
Right. So,
yeah.
so your mom and your dad, or any of your family members, none of them like played an instrument or did any kind of musical stuff at all?
Well, my mom had played piano a little bit when she was a kid. And then when I was 10 or 11, we got a piano, and she still had some of her old books. So I kind of taught myself. I'd learned to read music a little bit. I took violin for about a year, and my mother made me quit because it sounded so awful. Uh, so I kind of taught myself piano a little bit. Then I took lessons for a few years. But when you teach yourself, you develop really bad habits. My technique was lousy. So I kind of reached the point after a few years that I couldn't go any further unless I did try
Okay.
again a couple of years ago with piano lessons, and I'm just not really good about practicing anymore. So
That's okay, but we appreciate you as a vocalist. Again, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So when you were in middle school and high school, were you part of the choirs? Did you do any of that kind of stuff when
I
you were in
sang chorus in junior high school. We didn't have middle schools back then. But in high school, no, in high school, and I stopped taking piano. I was involved with, we're going to jump ahead to a question of, something that very few people know about me, but I spent 3 years in high school as the highest scorer and 2 years as the captain of the mathletes.
Oh, science, technology.
Yeah, math mostly.
Right,
Math.
mostly. Yeah, STEM
Yeah,
before it became STEM.
yeah.
So,
No,
so in high school, then you were more interested in the sciences than you were in music.
well, in math, and also I got involved not as a performer, but in stage design for the plays, and helping to run the shows, kind of as a stage manager, running the lights, running the sound. I loved that stuff. So yeah.
Oh, I like
That
backstage
was
stuff. I
that
mean,
and boys. I didn't have time for singing. I did get back to that in college, but
okay, speaking of college, so where did you go to school? Where did you study and what did you study? Because it obviously wasn't music. It had to be science and math.
I went to they used to call it Harper College, which is the undergraduate part of SUNY Binghamton, which is now called Binghamton University. And when I was there, it was about 5,000 students. I think it's like 25,000 now. But I changed my major almost as often as I changed my clothes. It was, let's see, at one time it was chemistry, it was math, it was music at one time, it was philosophy, 20th century German literature. I mean, I just kind of jumped all over the place.
So,
And got into engineering eventually. But
okay, I was going to say, at what point did you get into engineering and into math? Because we've already figured out the part that you didn't do music. I mean, you said you kind of majored in it a little bit, but so we figured out that. So, what did you graduate? What kind of degree did you graduate with?
Well, I ended up well, it's a long story, but I ended up going back to school a little bit later and got an engineering degree. But while I was at Harper, I did audition. That was a very select choir. They had the big university chorus, but then there was a little select choir that was like between 25 and 30 voices at any one time. And so I auditioned for that, and I was in that all 4 years. And we used to tour. We went all over, and you get a lot better at sight reading and stuff too, when you're doing that. And depending on what the needs were, I sang anything from first tenor to first soprano. Just we all just kind of filled in where.
Okay, so see, you had music in college, so you did do performing. So during all of this, what other did you do anything outside of college? Did you perform? Did you do any music? What were you doing outside of college that kept your interest in music?
My senior year of college, I finally got the nerve up to audition for a musical.
Okay.
I just, I used to sing all those songs at home, and I, singing in the choir, but the idea of just singing by myself was something I always wanted to do. But I finally got the nerve up and ended up getting the lead role.
Oh, nice. What musical?
The Fantastics.
Oh, that's a great one. I actually like that one.
Yeah. And I ended up playing that role, it was 3 or 4 different times in different different productions and stuff. But we moved, during the 70s, I stayed in Binghamton. I was married, had a couple of kids, had odd jobs. I was going back to school. And then the little free time I had, I was also doing a lot of musicals. And there was community theater, there was a dinner theater, and, playing different roles. So, yeah.
Okay, and that's where you got, because you had this distinct voice. I don't know how to explain this. You have a trained voice when you sing. It isn't just someone who's trying to sing who has never sung before. I can tell you have some musical background, and that because when you're on stage, you have to learn to project. Because back when you and I were doing musicals many, many years ago, they didn't have little microphones that, attached to our head or were glued right here. You had to learn to project, and you had to learn to sing in a way or in a manner that allowed you to hit the back of the audience. I mean, all the way in the back of the theater.
I don't have the same voice that I had back then. I was more of a lyric soprano, but I also could belt really loudly. I can't do that anymore. The 72-year-old vocal cords just don't go as far. So as you get older, you have to learn different techniques to, plus plus it's a very different style singing jazz, you know, but I
Oh
think
yeah.
the one thing from doing musicals though, and it's not so much from doing musicals, but maybe helped me always get these lead roles in musicals, is that to me, when you have lyrics, it's a very special thing. You know, you're being entrusted with what the song means.
Mhm.
And so it's very important for me for people to understand the lyrics, understand, you know, the emotions behind them. And so I try to focus on that as much as I can. Um, I don't know. It's
Musicals are a genre all within itself,
oh yeah,
because
oh
I
yeah.
have done on stage and I have been in the pit,
Mhm.
and it's a whole, it's a whole nother world, and there is very specifics to when you're doing musicals.
Yeah.
So
Jazz was one of the things that was tricky, and we'll talk later about how I kind of switched over and when, but in a musical, you're in the middle of a story.
mhm.
And so there is an emotional context already there. And when you're out there all by yourself, you don't have that. And you have to create some of that, but you can't like overdo it, you know. And it's just such a different style.
Oh well, so talk to me about that. So here you've been doing musicals, you're involved musically that way, and now what got you interested in jazz? How did that turn came about?
Oh, there were lots of steps in between. We moved here in 1980. And during the 80s, I was still doing a lot of theater here with, well, now it's Musical Theater Southwest, but it used to be Albuquerque Civic Light Opera.
Right,
Uh,
Alcloa.
yeah, yeah. And, but I started doing more theater that wasn't necessarily musically related, but I found that I hated acting. I really hated acting, but I loved directing. So back in the 80s and the 90s, between the Vortex Theater, Albuquerque Little Theater, Civic Light Opera, and then a few other productions in other parts of the country, I probably directed over 30 plays.
Oh my goodness, I
So
had no idea.
staging and I also got a lot more involved in coaching, coaching actors, coaching singers to help them act, actors to help them sing. I'm not a vocal coach at all, but in terms of a performance coach, just finding those little things that people do that get in the way of them getting their message out.
Hmm.
And so I did a lot of classes, a lot of workshops and things like that too. But then work just got so busy. I ended up having another baby. So, you know, 3 kids, and that I probably ignored way too much. But by the late 90s, by the late 90s, I'd kind of put most of that aside because work also started to get a lot more intense.
Boy, that
Yeah,
sounds like an awfully familiar story. So,
yeah,
so wait,
yeah.
now go back here. You
Mhm.
got to New Mexico, you said in 80?
Yes,
So what brought you and your family to Albuquerque originally? Was
a
it a
job at Sandia Labs.
okay? That was my question. So
Mhm.
you got a job at what was your what was your job at Sandia Labs? What were you doing at Sandia Labs that you could talk about legally?
I changed my job as frequently as I changed my clothes and changed. You know, I started out in materials technology, and but there were some folks who knew that I had a theater background, so I kind of got plucked to help teach workshops where you're dealing with engineers and scientists, and when they get on their feet and they have to talk to a group of people, you know, if you just talk to them one on one and they talk about their project, they're all excited about it. You put them in front of a group of people and they start pacing and they have their hands in their pockets and you know, and so helping them not blast out and entertain people, but help them just
Give
talk
a yeah,
and
give a
communicate their
presentation.
thoughts. So I
Yeah.
did a lot of workshops on that for years and years, and that was a little bit outside of work. But because I had that background and a technical background, they were starting to gear up classes and technical training. So I started doing some of that, which got me into some safety and health issues, which was something that was growing. So, so I was dealing with, developing those classes, which got me into other areas that had to do with quality assurance. So I
You
ended up
really did.
very,
You
very
were a jack of
deeply
all
into,
trades, weren't you?
so very deeply into quality assurance for a while. Some of it, a lot of it was with the nuclear weapon program, some of it on design issues, some of it on production issues. And so by 2006, I was assigned to go to Washington, D.C. I ended up there for 3 years as a technical advisor to the Department of Energy on the quality management systems of the nuclear weapon program. I was the advisor.
Oh boy, you really did jump around, didn't you?
I did a little bit of everything.
So, so in 2013, you retired from Sandia Labs as a senior systems engineer? What is a senior systems engineer?
Well, senior just has to do with different levels and different levels of experience, and it's not as high as it sounds. Mostly it was because I was taking a systems engineering approach to management systems. And so when I was at the Department of Energy for those 3 years, the way the nuclear weapon complex works is you've got certain facilities that do design work, certain that do production work, and they were all being managed separately. And sometimes they were all being managed very well, but the coordination of all of that was not very well managed.
Okay, so your job was to pull them all together.
Yeah, so that was a lot of what I was working on then. But I moved back in 2009, and it was kind of a tough period. There was a big breakup in my life, and coming back to Albuquerque, and they didn't know what to do with me at Sandia for a while. So it's a long story, but I ended up discovering that the New Mexico Jazz Workshop had classes for adults. And I hadn't sung in years and years. And I thought, I need something. So I'm going to be retiring soon. So I signed up and started taking classes with Patty Stevens.
Oh, nice.
Then started taking classes with Mickey Patton and took a few classes with Louis Wynn. And all of them were very encouraging. And they encourage all their students. It wasn't, it's me. But that was so important to me. And feeling that kind of feedback, and it just felt so good to sing. I wasn't necessarily looking to perform, but just getting out and singing again. I hadn't realized how much I missed that and how much that meant to me. So that's kind of how I got started in that.
Interesting. So how long, you had said back in the 90s was when you kind of stopped singing, and then so you came back, so it was probably about 10-15 years before a break there where you didn't do any kind of singing or anything?
I had stopped singing earlier in the 90s. I was still doing a lot of theater, but it was mostly directing, so I wasn't performing anymore. So yeah, I really hadn't performed much at all. I mean, sporadically a little bit here and there, but I really hadn't performed, probably, it'd probably been about 20 years.
Wow. That's interesting. So and
about 2010, yeah.
Right. And then here you get involved with some classes and you bring it back on. So now in the middle of doing all this, you were also a disc jockey. We call DJs. Now they're called radio personalities at KUNM.
Yeah, that started a little later. That
right.
was
so okay. So when was that? When did that start?
I don't remember exactly which year, but it was after I retired, and I would always call both stations and make contributions, and I occasionally had volunteered at KUNM answering phones. But one time I called KANW and made my contribution, and then I called back. I said, "You guys need help in the phone room or anything? Just offering my help." And Larry Gonzalez, who has since passed away, called me right back, and he said, "Yeah, can you show up tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock in the morning?" It's like, okay. So I walked in, and there's this little conference room, and there's phones, and there's a little sign about, thank you gifts and things, and there's nobody else. I don't see anybody. And then this phone starts ringing. So I asked, and took the contribution. But the way they did their fundraising at KANW is they would have kind of a group of people sitting around the microphones and talking. And one time, I guess they were shorthanded and they'd heard me on the phone. They said, "You want to come in and help ask for money?" So I was going back and forth and answering the phone and then coming back on the air. And because they were doing some construction in the building, they couldn't do their normal radio broadcasting class. But Kevin Otero asked me, he said, "We have an opening on Thursday mornings. Would you like to be an announcer for a couple hours?" It was like a 2-hour shift, I think, 2 or 3 hours. And I said, "Sure." So they gave me a crash course and how everything worked. And, I eventually did take the class, but then Chris Nichols, bless her, was the one who said, "There's an opening at KUNM. You'd be perfect for this." And so when Paul Gonzalez stepped down, I ended up taking his shift. It was Mondays. And then during the pandemic, I switched over to Thursdays. So,
so let's see if I could get this straight. You started out, you've done musicals, you did singing, you did directing, you're a scientist, you did every job possible at Sandia, and you were a volunteer radio personality, DJ, and overall good person at KANW and at KUNM. So for people who aren't aware of KANW, what's the numbers if they want to listen to KANW?
89.1.
Okay. And then KUNM is 89.9.
Yeah.
And you do, so right now you started at KANW and then you moved to KUNM. Now you do the Thursday afternoon, all that jazz shift from 12 to 1:30. I had to get it right. 12 to 1:30 every Thursday. How long have you been doing that now? Now, including the Mondays before you switch to Thursdays. How long you've been working at KUNM?
Almost 5.5 years now. Yeah, I started in April of 2018.
Okay. And you've been doing you've only done just all that jazz, right? You haven't done any of the other shows or anything?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
No.
And so
and it's been fun because I was still kind of new. I'm still new to jazz. We're all still learning lots of things. And so as I was learning things, I just get really enthusiastic. It's like, "Oh, and so I try to bring some of that, to the show. I'm a newbie too, and maybe you'll enjoy this. We have 5 different announcers, and each of the announcers I think has their own area that they really like. And my stuff is, it's more straight ahead stuff. I do some of the old bebop, and some real old stuff is kind of fun to play, but I try to play. It's important to me to play living musicians. That I don't know about you, but I joined a few different Facebook groups that focus on jazz, and I'm always amazed when somebody says, "Are there any decent jazz recordings after 1970?" I was like, "Are you kidding me?" The other thing I focus on is very often an artist or a group has more than one version of a particular song, and sometimes one of those versions is a live version. And the recording quality may not be as good in the live version, but it's so much more spontaneous and so much more fun. You can hear them sometimes talking to each other. You can hear the forks rattling on the plates and people talking, whatever. And I just love that because when it's live, it's so different than, what it gets produced sometimes in a studio. So those are the things I kind of focus on in the show.
Right. Well, one of the things that I noticed, because I've listened to you my fair share of times, is that your enthusiasm for new music. When you find something that you've never heard and then you put it on and you say, "No, you've got to listen to this. Listen to what they're doing here and listen to this." And your enthusiasm just comes through the speakers. And to me, that's one of the enduring qualities of listening to you is, one, I get to hear music that I don't often get to listen to. And then 2, it's your enthusiasm. I'm sorry, but it's true. Your enthusiasm makes it worth listening. And you get to interview lots of great people. And one of the things that you have an advantage over a lot of people is you get a lot of music that most of us don't have access to. They're pulling in music that KUNM brings in music. They get CDs sent to them. They get recordings sent to them that we don't always, as the general public, have access to. And so
Well,
you'll play unique stuff like that. To me, is like, oh, I never heard that one.
I don't use their library that much, to be honest.
Really?
I do use streaming services, and we don't play off of streaming services. That's just illegal. We just don't
Right.
do that. But I will use streaming services that will then suggest, if you like this, you'll probably like that kind of thing. And then sometimes I hear somebody I really like, and then if I really like them and I find I'm going back to it, then I go online and I buy it. And so a
Oh,
lot of the stuff ends up becoming part of my own library. And,
interesting. I had
so
no idea.
and then I find out that everybody else in the world has heard of this person. It's like, oh my gosh, But my biggest thrill is when I get a text from somebody that says, oh, I'd never heard of so-and-so before. I've gone back and listened to a bunch of her recordings, and now I'm buying them, and blah, blah. It's like, oh, good.
Interesting that you
Yeah.
don't use the KUNM library for your music, that you do this, you curate all this stuff on your own.
Most of it. I use their library for some things. Matthew Finch is really good, the music director, of setting aside the any new albums that do come in. And so I always check that every week, when I get there, just to see. But sometimes I already know about it. To be honest, I've gotten to know so many of the musicians now that sometimes they will send me, MP3s of their own stuff, and I can play off of an MP3, so that's not a problem.
Oh,
So yeah, there's
interesting.
lots of different sources, but yeah, you just pull
Okay.
in and
So what is so when you're getting ready to do your weekly show, what
Mhm.
is your thought process? What are you trying? Is there a particular, like, do you go, okay, I want to have this idea, or do you just kind of go random and figure it out as you go? Do you have a specific thought process?
I had more of a thought process earlier on, trying to do like themes and, I'll still occasionally, if it's, like Sonny Rollins' birthday, I'm going to play a couple of Sonny Rollins. He's still alive. He's not playing anymore, but, I'll play some of those things. I look for things like that. But other than that, I find that there's like a few songs that for whatever reason have been going through my head a lot, the previous week, and that'll be sort of an anchor. And then I just start building, I try to make sure I've got, not too many vocalists, but a few vocalists, some sax players, some piano, some new, some old, and just try to mix it up. Some things that are very familiar, some things that maybe nobody has heard before,
Right.
and just try to piece it together, kind of like a puzzle. I always pull more songs than I need, but I know what I'm going to start with. I know what I'm going to end with, and
Okay.
I know how I'm going to start and end maybe each half-hour segment. But then everything else is, depending on my mood.
Now, okay. So when I did radio, when I was in college all those years ago,
Mhm.
we were spinning records and we were using tapes and stuff like that. Nowadays, everything you do is digital, isn't it?
No. I mean, we've got CD players. I play mostly off of sticks. Some people bring their computer in. They have their playlist on the computer and play right off of that. But there's also, we still have a turntable. We still have quite a big selection of vinyls, in there. It's a little awkward for me because the turntable, I have short arms, and the way the control room is set up to work the control, and do this and do that. So I haven't tried to do that.
Okay.
But I have, there's still thousands of songs I haven't played yet. So
All
it's
right.
interesting because there was a particular recording I was looking for. Um, um, I belong to this group jazzvoice.com, and they sometimes have like master classes online, Zoom classes and things. And there's a woman out of Boulder, Marguerite Juniman, who was one of the founders of Rare Silk.
Oh, I know that group.
Yeah. And they're very, so I listened to all three of their first albums. And the first one is the one I really liked the most, because the rest of it started to get more fusion-y, and that's kind of not my thing. But the first one was just wonderful, and they got nominated for Grammys and everything else. But trying to find a copy that you could buy it was like, hundreds of dollars or something. It's very rare. They do have the vinyl there at the station. And
Oh,
one of the reasons I was looking for it is because I first listened to it and I'm thinking, listen to that bass. It's Kim Stone.
Stone.
Yeah, yeah. And it turns out he and Marguerite are very good
Yeah.
friends. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That album has my favorite version of Red Clay on it. My
Yes,
absolute favorite
yes,
version of Red Clay is
yeah,
on that album, and it's
yeah,
such a really, really good album.
yes,
And
yes.
when in doubt, go onto YouTube. You'll find it there too.
Yeah.
So we're going to switch gears here. We're going to talk about two other things I want to talk to you about.
Mhm.
The first one is this: now you have decided to take it upon yourself every week, and you do a list on your Facebook page of every single group that is performing in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Cruces, all over New Mexico. If it's jazz, if it's blues, you have it on that list. So why did you decide to take that upon yourself to do that?
Can you spell OCD? No, I originally started announcing some of the shows on the radio
Mhm.
when I took over Paul's show, because Paul used to announce some of the things that were going on in town. And I thought, and I would listen to his show on Mondays and go, oh, and he'd mention, Patty Stevens is going to be singing Thursday night. And I was like, oh, good, I want to see Patty. And so I started doing that too. And then when the pandemic hit, during the pandemic, that first year and a half, we ended up having to produce the shows from home. You had to learn a whole lot about sound engineering very, very quickly, because I knew nothing. I was back in my closet with, my winter coats all hanging around me. So it wasn't too noisy, but it was real important then to announce the few things that were going on because there was so little going on.
Yes.
And so I started doing that. And then it started to grow as the pandemic started to weaken and more places were opening up, at least the outdoor places. But then somebody had called me one time and they were worried. They were putting on a show, and I won't get into the specifics of where or when or who, but they said, we're having trouble selling tickets. And I was looking at all the things because I was putting together my list for the radio. And I said, do you have any idea how many things are going on at that same time that probably appeal to the exact same audience? And then I thought, well, let me put that down on paper. And then it kind of grew from there. And I started putting it on Facebook. And it's mostly, a few of the venues are pretty good about putting out like a monthly list or a weekly list, but mostly it's me bugging people. And we've gone back and forth on the group
Yeah,
that you're
I
with,
send you stuff and tell you, make sure
and
you know where we're playing. And
yeah. And so a lot of groups are very good about, putting them as events on Facebook. So I just pull all of those events. That's why I always say I'm interested, even if I'm not going to go, just because I can then find them all and get the information from there. But there's a few musicians that, I contact them or they contact me every Sunday or Monday, and I get a whole list of what's going on for the week. There's a couple of musicians that give me a month's worth of information. And and that helps a lot because putting all of that stuff in is
it's
OCD
time
and ADHD
consuming.
at the same time. It's like, oh my gosh.
It's so
Don't
time
talk to me. I'm working on
consuming.
the list. But it's been interesting because the musicians seem to be happy about it. They like to see, that their stuff has been listed there. It helps a lot of musicians realize that there were a lot more venues that are available that they didn't know about. It's like, oh,
Correct.
like you've got something coming up this weekend at a place I'd never heard of before.
Right.
There's tons of breweries, and these days, if a brewery wants to compete with any other brewery, they're going to have some music because most of them have music now.
Right. Yeah.
But it's mostly it's for the people who want to see music and hear music.
Right.
And
And all of
that's
us
really who I'm
appreciate
doing
that.
it. And I do
Yeah.
it mostly for them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, and I mean, I looked at the list this last time, these last few weeks, the last month of the summer, that list just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. So if somebody wanted to find you on Facebook, I'll put the link down below so that they can get that public list, so they
Sure.
can know here's where they can find jazz in Albuquerque and
Yeah.
in Santa Fe, Taos, Las Cruces, all these different places. And that way they know here are the venues that have jazz. And that way listeners and all these people who want to come and hear us play have the opportunity. So which leads me to
Okay.
your performing, because I have performed with you numerous times down at Cactus. I have listened to you perform at Q Bar. I have listened to you do all these different things. You have a couple of groups that you have performed with, and you have one that does a regular session over at Bike and Coffee on the weekends. Tell me about that.
Okay. Yeah, it kind of grew from the fact that I was always going to Bike and Coffee, because to be honest, it's like 3 minutes from my house. So I would go there very frequently, especially during the pandemic, and got to know Linda fairly well. And I would sit in with some of the bands. And one time there was an opening, somebody had to cancel at the last minute. And I said, "Do you think I could, take it?" And so she let me have it. So we play there. It's averages between once and 3 times a month.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a very comfortable place. It's, Linda knows, she says, "I know I don't pay you very much, but it's, for us, it's like having an open rehearsal under the trees, and they feed us really, really well." And so it's Vic Romanelli, who I actually first met at Sandia,
Right.
because he was involved in nuclear generator production. And we won't go any further than that. And I didn't know that he was a musician until I saw him playing with Mickey one time. It's like,
Right.
oh, that's Vic Romanelli,
Yeah.
And so we're buddies. And Jack Hannon, who I just adore as the bass player, we have two sax players, Dan Kelly and Daniel Moreno, and that works out well, because sometimes Dan Kelly, because of his job, he's the only one with a full-time job in the group. So if we have a weekday thing, Dan Moreno subs, and well, they're not subbing, but I love
Right.
it when they get to play together. But it's nice that they can cover for each other. Dan Moreno is in so much demand with lots of different groups too these days. And then we have Kevin Powell, who is relatively new in town. He moved here last summer, and he plays percussion. And it's interesting, it takes a little adjustment, because he's not playing on a regular drum kit. He does, he brings his congas and his bongos, and and he sits on his little cajon, and but it brings a different sound. So we don't sound like every other combo. It gives us just a slight edge, and even though we don't do that many Latin songs, it just brings a different rhythm. And he can do swing on those instruments. But it's nice to have something different. And he's probably one of the sweetest people in the world. So
I've had some conversations with him. He's very, very nice.
Yeah.
So besides Bike and Coffee, are there other venues that you guys perform at? Because like I said, I've seen you at other places sitting in, and I know you do the Bike and Coffee on a regular basis. Are there other venues that you're trying to get into?
We're trying, a few other places, and, you make calls and stuff, and you wait to hear back. But I wanted to wait until we felt a little more established. Because at first it always sounded like it was a jam session, pretty good jam session. But, you get a few rehearsals and you perform together a lot. And we have some of our own arrangements and our own style now. Kevin is the one that got us a gig a couple of months ago at Books on the Bosque. It's an independent bookstore that's like Corso Montano area. And we're going to start playing more regularly there. And it gets us a different audience. So the last time we were there, somebody picked up my card, and now there's this West Side Music Festival at one of the churches on the West Side. And so we were asked to be part of that.
Nice.
So we got to play in Old Town. So that was kind of fun,
Yeah.
It's little things here and there. It starts to grow. I haven't really been pushing it, and I probably should more, but we just really enjoy each other's company.
Well,
I do want to mention one thing though, in terms of the Facebook page. My Facebook page is public, so anybody can access it, and
Yes.
it's always the pinned post. It's always the very top post, so people shouldn't have trouble, finding it. So,
And I'll
yeah.
put a link down below that people can click on it
Okay,
and go
okay.
to it. So perfect. Well, we are running out of time. I
Yes,
want to thank
yes.
Allison for joining me today. I want to thank you for all you do, both musically and radioly. Is that a word? Radioly? Radio-wise, music-wise, and everything you're doing for the music community. And ladies and gentlemen, we will catch you next time.